everyone, it's Ray with Tarot Living. So this is a video with regard to court cards and astrological attributions and how you would incorporate that into a reading. So I have a reading of 3 cards and I've just literally randomly pulled these cards. So if you want to know more about astrological attributions of court cards, I have several videos. I believe there's 3 currently posted and there'll be a 4th one coming up as well, that are posted on the details of that. This is going to focus on interpretation. So you can see that the Knight of Swords is here, and so I'm starting with the Knight of Swords as my court card that I'm interpreting. Now remember that court cards, when they come up in a reading, they can mean either internal characteristics, so it can be a characteristic that the querent or your client has, that they're holding, that they're needing to express or needing to get in touch with or utilize in a situation. It could also be an external person, so somebody else within their life, or it could even be an event. Those are kind of the 3 main things that court cards can mean when they come up in a reading. I'm going to pick one for each of these readings. I'm going to do one for every court card, and so I'm going to pick kind of one that we'll focus on for each reading rather than doing 3 for each reading. So let's do an internal motivation. So let's say that the querent, this comes up and it's representing the client's characteristics that they need to get in touch with. So the Knight of Swords relates to the sign of Gemini. And so Gemini is an air sign, and it's what we call mutable, which means that it's very adaptable and very movable. And Geminis tend to be very oriented toward mental activities, communication. They love to chat. They love to learn things. They're very expressive, quick-witted, can be very curious and congenial. So very air-related activities or mentally related activities. So the Knight of Swords, if we're looking at some of the meanings of the Knight of Swords, it's someone who's quick thinking and can be very swift and adept in what they do, an assertive communicator, a younger person who's very mentally active and decisive action and kind of forceful intellect. They can be restless and adaptable and really want to get out there and do things. So they're mentally driven, and their expression is going to be very assertive. So you can see the similarities, of course, between Gemini when I listed those things off and the Knight of Swords when I listed the keywords off for the Knight of Swords. So that's who we're dealing with here. So let's take a look at what it might mean in a reading. So again, we're going to be using the internal characteristics. So these are the characteristics. So this person has pulled these 3 cards. So whether you use the Knight of Swords as a significator card or if you're pulling it and it comes up in a reading, it's going to mean that this person is going to be very actively using their mind. And so their communication is potentially going to be very assertive. Their thought system is going to be very quick. They're going to want to move forward very quickly with whatever it is that they want to do. They might be very decisive and make decisions very quickly. They might not be sitting around waiting for anything to happen. They're really going after what they want. They see something that they want and they're going to go after it. And you can see he's really charging ahead. And so if you look at all the knights in the deck, this is the knight, the horse is moving the fastest, and he's just really charging ahead. So they're going after whatever it is that they want. So sometimes this can mean that, you're in the process of making a decision and you're going to make it very quickly. It can mean that you're mentally thinking about something and perhaps your mind is just racing about it. It can mean that, basically you're just you're feeling very on top of your game in terms of your mental activity. But with regard to communication, it can also mean that you're very assertive and potentially even being more aggressive in your communication. So you might want to check yourself. Am I being overly assertive here? Am I being too forceful in my communication? Those kinds of things. So if we add that then to the next card, you can see that it's another sword card, and swords, of course, are related to mental activity and intellect, and also connecting with others as well. But swords are very much about your mental activity, your learning, your capability of taking in information, your communication, that sort of thing. So it's really what's happening in this person's mind, because we have two cards that are swords that came up. So look at how this card, the Four of Swords, is just so very different than the Knight of Swords. And you can see immediately that you have quite an opposition between these two cards. And interestingly enough, I can see, if I'm looking at it visually, my Knight of Swords is going this way, and my Four of Swords is just, laying, his head is laying this way. And so it almost feels like these are very much in opposition. So potentially this person is moving a little too quickly, and suddenly the Four of Swords comes up and says, hey, we need to take a rest. We need to have some respite. We need to have, really just a kind of a vacation from all of that mental workings. Or maybe you're in the middle of, communicating about something or trying to drive ahead with your decisions, and this card is saying, we need to actually hold back. Fours in the tarot deck tend to be a stable number. They're a very grounded number, but they're not really very movable. They're not very changeable. In contrast to the Knight of Swords, which, remember I said, is a mutable card, and it's very changeable and very adaptable and really wants to drive ahead. And the Four is saying, no, we're going to stay put. So it's really needing to just pull back, and it's saying that we need to really take a break from all of that activity. It almost reminds me like the Knight of Swords. If you can imagine him, it's like he's charging ahead and maybe he's just gone a little too far, and he actually needs to just fall back, and he falls back, and he's laying on the sarcophagus, and he's just resting there. And so it could be a time where you need to slow down with your communication, you need to slow down with your decision making, need to relax, and we need to take a rest, and we're going at it a little bit too hard, and we may not be able to accomplish all that we want because maybe it's gotten out of balance. So this card is saying, how can we get back into balance? And in fact, this card is sometimes depicted as a person meditating, and I've seen several decks with that. And so this person, imagine them meditating. You're trying to quiet your mind, you're trying to relax your mind, you're trying to create peace and harmony when there isn't any. And then we move to the third card, and we have the Judgment. And we can see that through these two cards creating such opposition and such difference, we can see that some kind of rebirth is happening here. So it's almost as though there's a lot of change that needs to occur. And these cards, having such unique characteristics, are pulling this person toward change. So it's really saying this is going to drive you towards some change, and you are going to be able to make that change where you can have some rejuvenation, some rebirth, some liberation, and some freedom from whatever it is that you were doing that maybe wasn't working, and we're able to start again. And it's also suggesting that if you maybe took it too far in terms of your communication with somebody, maybe there's sort of a level of, forgiveness and needing to move on and saying, okay, I went too far with something, or I need to deal with something differently, and I want to make a change. And so there's a change that potentially could happen with that Judgment card. But it's a card of rebirth, and it's a card of rejuvenation, and spiritually as well. So it almost feels like this person has grown and has learnt from perhaps charging ahead too quickly and needing to take a rest. So I hope that helps in terms of an interpretation of the Knight of Swords and how you can weave in the astrological information. You can also use these cards for timing as well. So the Knight of Swords relates to Gemini, which is, of course, the typical Gemini sign would be, about May 21st to June 20th, that type of time frame. So if you are using court cards for timing, that would be it. If you're following the more specific astrological attributions of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, though, because in their infinite wisdom, they had the court cards overlapping with the prior sign, which would be Taurus, by a little bit. So the technical duration would actually be May 11th to June 11th. And it would be from 20 degrees of Taurus to 20 degrees of Gemini. That's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. But if you're just starting out, just looking at the Gemini period would be perfectly fine. So I hope this helps. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. On the right-hand side, you'll see a little circle with me meditating. And you can just hold your cursor over that and go to my page and subscribe. Thanks for watching Tarot Living. Take care.